theunlearningcurvepodcast@podbean.com.
Now in the Unlearning Circle, we're going to be talking about our mental health moment as we talk through all of this. And so, Carl, can you start us off? What aspect of mental health are we diving into today?
Sure. Yeah, Laura, my wife, is involved with the Attachment and Trauma Network. They do trauma-sensitive schools, conferences, and educators or teach educators how to be trauma-informed and trauma-responsive. And we have started going each year to the conference and volunteering so we can get tuition free. And we go to these and so one of the main people they have explain the brain. I think understanding the brain is helpful. And even just to generally understand how it works helps us a lot in trying to deal with our trauma from the past. And Dan Siegel is one of the main people that they have to explain that. And he's pretty popular and pretty widely known. But so there's a couple of videos we want to recommend, and then we're going to have a discussion about that. We've kind of looked at them already, but I encourage you to go out and look at these. One of those is a guy named Science Mike. He used to be called Science Mike. His name is Mike McHargue. That's McHargue. He was known as Science Mike back in the day, and they had a big podcast that they did that I don't remember the name. Sorry.
I think it was just called Science Mike.
Or or the liturgist or something like that. I can't remember exactly, so I don't want to say, but
fair enough.
He is now just Mike McHargue, and he works with businesses and movie people and stuff like that. Really, really smart. He's on the spectrum, but just really good insight into things. In chapter 2 of his book, which is called "You're a Miracle and a Pain in the Ass," and in chapter 2, he talks about your brain is a burrito and why it matters. And so he uses that. And there's a YouTube out there where he talks about his Play-Doh model. Some of us have seen he has a Play-Doh model of the brain. So he takes these individual pieces and puts it on the Play-Doh and kind of explains, in general, how the brain works. Now it's made up of 3 parts. That was the point of his burrito model. But a lot of people in this trauma-sensitive schools arena use this model by Dan Siegel. And there's also a video out there for that. And it is called Dr. Dan Siegel's Hand Model of the Brain. So look at that, in your spare time. And I'm going to try to get back to where I was here. And so, because I think it's good.
Understanding the brain is very, very difficult.
Yeah.
I have to teach all this in psychology, and it's my least favorite part, but it's very interesting.
Yeah. In this video, he uses the fist kind of as a model. So when you tuck your thumb under and put your other fingers over that and hold it up kind of like a Black Power thing, right? Except with your thumb under, then in ways that represents the brain. So you have the root brain, which I'd encourage you to watch the video, not try to understand what I'm saying, but talks about the wrist. That area right in there is the brain stem, the reptilian brain. It's the lower part of your brain. It's the part that reacts, right? Keeps you alive, connects with the rest of your body, and so on. But then also underneath those fingers is that thumb, which would be the amygdala and some of those things, the midbrain, the mammal brain. And then the top, which they call the lid, is the fingers that go over that. And the fingernails might be your prefrontal cortex. The rest of it's the cortex. It's the higher part of your brain that reasons. And so when he describes that, I think it's just helpful, because then when we look at trauma, he talks about when we have trauma, then those fingers come up, and he calls it flipping your lid, and it's the thing we all go through when we're triggered. The prefrontal cortex goes offline, flip our lid. And so what's reacting is those other parts of the brain that react faster than the cortex does. It's finding the difference between reacting and responding. So I just think those kind of models sometimes are really helpful for us to get it, kind of envision what the brain looks like and how we respond. And for me, it got really important to realize that when I was trying to deal with my trauma, just to understand that it's a part of my brain that thinks I'm in danger because my wife said something wrong to me. You know, when she said something wrong, then my lid flipped. I'm not thinking anymore logically. I'm reacting like there's a bear outside and I got to defeat this thing before it gets me. And those are the kind of responses you're having almost automatically. And if we were in the middle of the Alaskan frozen tundra or whatever it is, then those skills might come in handy, right? That we would react quickly, that the adrenaline would start pumping but it's not appropriate for having a discussion with my wife. And so in dealing with my trauma, I think those kind of models are often helpful. Right. So did you guys kind of get some of those same things from?
Yeah. My question first is, how scary is Laura when she gets mad? That's really where I was going for this fight or flight.
Petrifying.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had the sense never to cross her, but you guys have helped me there too.
Yeah. Thanks for getting me in a lot of trouble.
Your instincts were right. I'm going to be in a lot of trouble when I get back soon.
Yeah. After it was over, I felt really silly, that I had responded that way. That, it was like, this is a battle I got to win no matter what. And I suppose that's where physical abuse can come in. And when it triggers your 5-year-old brain to start working and responding before you knew how to regulate yourself and all those kind of things. Yeah, I think I was able eventually to think through it and say, Laura's not the threat. Laura's not the problem. Even when I did the sabbatical, when I was having my dark night, even then I was blaming people like my wife going into that experience. And it took some real deep inner work to get past that. And then been working ever since to be where I respond instead of react. But understanding the brain, kind of having a model to work with where it can make sense to us when we're talking about it, I think it helps understand why we do what we do.
I think with that, it reminds me and of how difficult it is for us to be able to make new pathways in our mind after we've had consistent ones, especially like those base trauma instincts. That was when I started therapy a couple of years back. I remember there was such a stigma around getting on medication to be able to help with, because I was like anxiety. Mine was like anxiety that would lead to depression type stuff, but I was reticent to do that. But I remember when I had a doctor just tell me, and it's like, well, the idea is with this is you take this stuff and it'll help you. It'll help raise your, it'll help raise your brain or elevate it a bit, so you can start to do some of the heavy lifting while you're on these meds in order to do it. Because I've known so many people that just assume you can take meds and it'll fix it. But it's that taking the meds and then having to do the hard work that it is very hard to rewire your mind, and it's very difficult, but it's worth it. I think for us to be able to dig through that the trauma that we have.
I would see medicine as regulating. That's regulating, but regulation doesn't necessarily help us. It helps us prevent future trauma, but it did, like you said, it doesn't do the hard work of going back and doing the work. You still got to do that, right?
Yeah.
But it allows you enough regulation so that you can go do the work, right? JD, where are you at on all this?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, even though it is hard work, our neuroplasticity in humans is pretty good, especially if you get it young. That's the best, is if you can get it when people are young. But yeah, I think I use I haven't used any of these specific models, but I've used similar models to kind of simplify stuff. I think it's always better if we can dive as deep as possible, but I would say I'm not qualified to dive that deeply. So I agree that these kind of models are useful. But yeah, once we have that understanding, it is about actually going and doing that work. And I've had this with students who have different diagnoses where I have to go, I can get you the information that you need, or like you can relay what your therapist says, but then you have to do, a lot of times in psychology, we call it homework. You have to do the homework.
Mm-hmm.
You have to go home and do it. And so I've had to do that with a lot of current and previous students before, where I just go, okay, just go do the homework that you know you need to do, and then just send me an email. Say you did it, or if you're struggling with not being able to do it, then email me and tell me your struggle, and then we'll talk through it via email or whatever. But it's really hard, and it's especially hard when you don't have a support system. And I have more experience, obviously, with it here, and it's a little bit of a different situation. But I think from what I've heard from some friends in the U.S., it's similar. Is that especially as you go back through the generations, you have less people that even believed in mental illness in general, or at least believed in that it was like curable, or there was things we could do with it. That's where you get problems with people not wanting to take medicine. But it's also that, like, well, you just grit your teeth and bear it out. You be an alpha male, or all those kind of things. But so you get these people. I have, again, for my example, I had students who are like, yeah, I'm trying to work through this, but like anytime I have anxiety, my parents just like scream at me or something. And I'm like, well, that's not correct. So unfortunately, you're going to have to be the adult in this situation and deal with it, because I can't tell your parents what to do. And so it makes it, the whole system makes it much harder. But I do think on the whole, hopefully it's getting better. At least it feels like that. I don't have the exact numbers, but
we spoke about my dog throwing up again. I think he might be.
Is he gonna flip your lid?
Don't flip your lid. You need to deal with this in a good manner.
Come on, Carl.
My dog is sleeping. She was crying like the whole day. She's being quiet now. So
okay, I don't know if either of you know about it. Attachment. We talked about it a little bit, I think, in the beginning, but the attachment and trauma network that we listen to because of Laura's associations and so on, they say attachment is everything, and that attachment to a caregiver early on. JD said it's hard when people aren't with you, right? So when you have that attachment, it makes a lot of some of this better, and we need maybe to restore that, I think. But attachment, meets kind of a lot of those root brain needs, so that it's easier for us to integrate. And can you guys also relate, though, to integration? And in somatic therapies, they talk about integration a lot. It's not that we need to exercise the trauma, or not that we would, learn about our trauma and then it'll be fixed. But it's integrating inner child, inner critic, integrating that trauma back into our nervous system to lead us towards responding instead of reacting. So your thoughts on any of that? Attachment, integration, maybe flipping your lid from the example?
I think that there's part of that is that also when you don't have those primary socializers, or if you have a bad primary socializers, that you have, like, I don't know what the term for, but using like the idea of integration and talking to what Stuart was kind of talking about, is you create these like bad neural pathways, which is like really hard to fix. But it is doable through a lot of hard work.
Fixable. Yeah.
It is fixable. That's one thing that I think a lot of people, we need to make it very clear. And that's been a message that I've had to tell to a lot of people I've dealt with, is like, it is fixable. And here are a million examples of where it did work. So you can, it's not going to be easy, but it is doable. But in terms of like that kind of the idea of integration, I've dealt with that less, but kind of something, at least insofar as I understand it, that would be similar is like things like exposure therapy, and obviously cognitive behavioral therapy. Those kind of things seem like that's what it is you're taking small amounts of it and measured amounts of it in safe environments and kind of reintroducing it, and then learning to, instead of like you're talking about, instead of reacting to it, you're taking it in, you're going, why am I reacting this way? Why do I want to react this way?
And you're
And then
still
instead
feeling
replacing
it, right?
it with something
Mhm.
I
better.
mean, you're still
For
feeling
sure.
it
Yes,
when you do that.
absolutely.
In fact, you have to feel it, right?
It's not, I don't think it's not even a choice. It's just that you do feel it until you fix the issue that's causing that. It's not a choice. It's a reaction, right? So it's by definition, you can't avoid it until you learn how to work through that.
Telling me to heal it, you have to feel it. Catchphrase
That might be what I'm
there.
saying.
Yeah,
Might be what I'm saying.
That's a catchphrase, but I think it has a lot of truth to it.
No, but there's a lot of truth to that too. That it's something I've had to learn. That it's when like going through a situation, it's challenging the thoughts, but it's also honoring the emotions that you're going through. So sometimes this situation is going through, and I'm going to assign like certain blame or something to that thought, like you screwed up, why, or something like that. And stepping back to observe it and realizing that that's not me, like those thoughts aren't necessarily me. And then being able to see through that, okay, but I do want to honor the fact that I'm having a physical reaction within myself to this, and you're right. It's kind of like it's like slowly down. It's almost like learning to deconstruct your process of what's happening. And I think you're mentioning, Carl's like, step one to be like learning to not flip your lid, and then it starts walking it back towards like what are these other parts that I'm needing to work on, or what? Yeah.
I noticed in your explanation, in your explanation, you mentioned thoughts and emotions, right? And so thoughts are in this top part of your brain. Emotions are in your midbrain, mammal brain. That's where your emotions are that connect with your nervous system. So those two together, those two have to connect. It's not just, well, my therapist told me I'm this, and now I understand that condition, and so now I'm better. It's until you connect with the other part, essentially with your body, eventually, then when you connect to your body and feel it, then you can heal it. And that healing means rewiring, neuroplasticity, like JD said. And that's when we start to get better. Sorry, JD, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Okay. What I was going to say, like to Stuart's point, is like he's like saying that it's not you, which is true. It's not. We have to kind of separate that from like our individual person. Just like when we're talking about deconstructing from things like religion, it's like to say like this idea is wrong. If we have already internalized it, it's to say that I am wrong. You have to get away from that, but it is to the very valid point you made is that it is a valid feeling because it may not be you, but it is part of your experience, your lived experience. And so that is really something that you have to deal with. Yeah. And then, you do have to make all those connections and feel it, but then be able to recognize. It has to be like, and kind of going back to the idea that both of you have talked about of like understanding when you're feeling something, or understanding like the process through which like I have this whatever trigger and then I have the reaction, is understanding, okay, first, what are my triggers? Obviously, like you guys said, that doesn't fix the problem, but it does get a step in there where it's like, okay, I know these things are my triggers. And so when I get that, and then I feel it. So once I feel it, then once I start to have that feeling, I can cut it off, as opposed to just letting it manifest.
In focusing, we say a part of me feels, because like you guys were aptly pointing out, if I say I'm sad, that means all of me is sad. That's my identity, and that's shaming, right? To say, just like I am a failure, or at this time I failed. It's that differential that a part of me feels, which then connects me to my midbrain and helps me work through it consciously, right? So a part of me feels not I am sad. A part of me feels sad. And then I can feel that and eventually integrate it. I think that's why it works.
I think also, and again, I think we'll say this out loud. None of us are experts, and we're just riffing on this.
Correct.
Just wanting to make that sense.
Yes.
Out there. And after that, I totally forgot my thought. So that was great that we had that. Any other stuff?
So maybe we should say this, because this is the only authority we have right now. It's our experience. So
Yeah.
what was you guys' experience in connecting parts of the brain? What has been your experience in any of that where you've done some work and seen results, however you want to describe that?
For me, I think when I mentioned meds earlier, I went on my journey. I think I was on stuff for 2 years and then decided I was like, I wanted to get off. And that was a really weird and interesting journey of pulling off of them. What I began to see through some of the work I'd done with therapy, with being kinder to myself, having a better self-dialogue as well in my head, I began to see that like the roots of a lot of my stuff were trauma. But the hard thing for me was trauma had, even though it was awful to myself mentally and my body, not trauma, I mean anxiety. Trauma had manifested as anxiety. Was that anxiety was a great fuel for me for a lot of stuff. I mean, I think you, especially working in ministry, you throw in the idea that we're all like sinful, damaged pieces of garbage. And then you throw in this anxiety that we somehow have to constantly be living up to God. That was my fuel for doing stuff. And so it's been a weird process for probably the last 6 months to a year for me, was learning to live life where I don't have trauma as my main fuel system. Not trauma, I keep saying anxiety is my main fuel system for pushing me forward. In that, and it feels weird. Like a lot of it always felt like it was me. It was a part of me, and me being able to realize it's that anxiety is not me. It's just a reaction that I'm doing. It was very different, and it also made me feel very odd and alone in a certain sense, because I could always just lean in on that self-pushing anxiety to finally get me to a place where I needed to go. But it was me effectively just being abusive to myself over and over again in order for me to get results and get stuff done. And so it's like remapping what happens now. It's just very different.
When I hear you saying that, I hear that connection to the alpha male subject we talked about before. That anxiety, that quick response dysfunction really makes you a better alpha male in a lot of ways. So it's kind of celebrating the wrong thing, and we didn't say that in the last section.
I wish I'd have known you earlier. I could have been a better alpha man if I would have just connected those two, my anxiety and my desire to dominate and have big facial hair.
JD, what about you? What's your take on that?
Like a simpler one for me that like I've dealt with, and kind of tracing back to the idea of like exposure and stuff, is like I still deal with like a lot of social anxiety, and I don't have a therapist and don't know 100% where that comes from, but I think it comes from like always feeling kind of observed and under scrutiny. Like I've probably told this on podcasts, and I've definitely told to you before, Dad, is just like walking down the street in like a small town and someone coming up to you and being like, Jordan or JD. I'm like, who the fuck are you? I don't know who you are. Don't talk to me. Stranger danger. And they're like, oh, I know your dad, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, this is weird. Like just kind of that feeling of surveillance. I think that's part of it. But then also like growing up in the church and it's a number of different things. But anyway, like for me, going back to that idea of exposure therapy, like I do a lot of like photography, and like one of my favorite things to do is street photography. And like that basically means going into like super dense areas. And I think that that's been quite good for me in terms of dealing with that, is like knowing that it's going to like give me like that elevated sense, but then going in and like getting something positive out of it. And then like sitting down with it afterwards and reviewing it and being like, oh, I felt a little bit stressed here, but like I did something I enjoy, and like I had fun with it, and like it's gotten like quite a bit better. It obviously I still have issues with it, like if I'm in a bad mood or I'm like very drained or something. But I guess the more serious one, I guess, or like the one that like took longer to deal with would be just like things around shame, like talking about kind of what Stuart was mentioning in the ideas of like, we're imperfect, we're sinners, we're like always wrong, we're never going to live up to like God. Anything we do at any moment could damn us to hell forever, especially when I was young. Like that fucks with your brain. It's really bad for you. It's super, super bad for you. And I don't know. I thankfully kind of like went through that early and then kind of got through it to a degree. But even up and like through university, it was still like a big thing that I would just kind of like try to do escapism to get it away from, whatever it was. But yeah, that's kind of been a lifelong one that like I still see pop up every once in a while. And yeah, it's something that like you can definitely work through, but you still have to monitor. That's one. I'm kind of saying this so I don't forget to do this, but it's just like I have to remember, like I'm trying to escape because like I'm worried about not being enough, or imposter syndrome, etc.
Why does this kind of healing not happen in church generally?
I think because of what we
the
talked
first
about
thing
earlier.
people say is, well, not my church, it does.
Yeah, but
what were you saying, JD?
it's about keeping those power structures. If you actually deal with that stuff, then you're going to have people who are sentient, competent human beings that will be able to push back on you and go, you're giving me more trauma. Actually, what you're doing is bullshit. So you need to stop it. And then that reduces your power. And now you're the bad guy, possibly. That's my take.
And it's messy.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean,
yeah.
churches don't want that because it's messy.
Yeah.
Which is crazy because they should be like the messiest places around just because of what they're supposed to be.
They are, just not for the right reasons.
That's true. That's true.
It's supposed to be a hospital. We don't really have time. We can't admit any new patients today because we don't have time. The other thing is it makes people uncomfortable when you sit down and finally talk about a real problem when you're brave enough to tell somebody about it, because you might get gossiped about and it's going to lead to all kinds of things. But when I finally get brave enough, it makes the other person uncomfortable.
Yep.
And they don't know what to say. And so they say stupid things like, well, it's all going to be better in the end. Well, at least you had a miscarriage, but at least you have two other healthy kids. It's all that
God's
escapism
plan.
and
God's plan. Yeah.
And God's plan and bypassing things never really gets to the heart of it. But when we're triggered, when there's a past experience that's affecting us now, right? The event, we talked about the event, the experience, and the effect, so now it's having its effect. Something in modern day life triggered me. Now I'm feeling something from way back.
Yeah.
If I can sit with that long enough, I believe, and I've experienced this, that if I can sit with that long enough, and I called JD, my son, one time when I was in that mode of experiencing something from the past that I couldn't even explain hardly, but I was feeling it. I was freaking weeping, and when he just kind of let me do that with him, and then, you can almost feel it integrating, kind of rewiring. I think there's a lot of therapies that can do that, and therapists can walk you through something like that, where you just experience that and feel it. When you feel it, you have a chance to heal it. So use another phraseology.
I'll give you another phraseology, and this is what I was thinking in that moment was when we were having that conversation, because I remember it, because that was not an easy conversation for me. Was initially I was like, tell him it's okay, tell him it's going to be fine, tell him it doesn't matter, tell him it's not a big deal. But a phrase that I tell a lot of people, and I tell it in a more cleaned up way to my students, but it's okay to shut the fuck up sometimes and just listen to people. And it goes back to what I was talking about earlier with you don't always have to be an expert in everything. You can just be quiet and be there for someone. And whether that's learning from them or whether that's helping them process through these things, you can just be quiet. And sometimes that's what people need. Because in a lot of times you can ask them, what do you need right now? They get out what they need to get out. Do you want advice right now? Or do you just need me to listen? And a lot of people, most people will be honest with you, especially if you're quiet at first. They realize that you trust them and you're there for them. And I think it's not perfect. And it's, again, like Stuart was saying, it's messy and it's uncomfortable as all get out. But it's what we have to go through to get where we want to go.
But what an interesting too, like for you guys both having this moment, it's also a deeper moment of intimacy too.
Yeah.
To be able to sit there and be there with another person, because we're generally uncomfortable with losing our shit in front of other people.
Yeah.
Especially like even around our kids, but even for you to sit then, JD, and experience it and just share that space as well too. I think those are the deeper things that we're talking about, the mess with it, because we don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
We don't have a prescriptive answer. There's no kumbaya at the end of this, but I think that's the beautiful mess that we need to be able to be willing to step into.
Yeah.
And the answer is, after that, it does get better. It's and not permanently, not 100%. It's always trajectory up. But after that, at the end of that phone call, we continued. It didn't end with that. We didn't just hang up the phone. You weren't fixed. You weren't 100% fine, but you were better. We were better than when we started that conversation.
Exactly.
And that's the goal.
Definitely was. I can attest to that. And we talked about attachment before. That's part of it, right? The Benedictine sisters that taught me that, when they would say, "What do you feel? How do you feel it?" Because I would go in and brag about what I'd done in the past month, and aren't I good? And I do the dance, and then they go, "But what are you feeling right now?" And when I get deep about that and start talking about it, then it would come up, and they would just go, so you feel, part of you feels sad. And I'd say, yeah. And then I'd go on, and eventually you're like weeping when you connect with that part of you. And it does begin to heal you. And I think everything you guys have said is tremendous. When we go back to the brain model, he also has, if you can find it online, it's a very good kind of model of the brain. It's called the brain state lens, reframing behavior with brain science. If you want to look that up, there's a great picture. Kind of talks about the three parts of the brain. The bottom one would be the brain stem, and it's the state is survival. And the question is, am I safe? That's the question that lower part of your brain is asking. If I'm not, I'm going to try to make your body. Since I've had my stroke, I've noticed my leg and my arm in situations where like I'm frightened a little bit, or other things where it's like an unusual thing, then my leg and my arm both stiffen up because they've lost some connection there, but they still have that, something's wrong. And they act weird. But the middle part is called the limbic, LIMBIC state. That is our emotional state. So in religion, when we decry, when we say we shouldn't have emotions don't matter, I would argue strongly against that. They're really, and that is the part where we talk about that connection, that attachment. So the limbic system says, "Am I connected?" And when we are, things go better. But then the cortex is the executive state, the higher brain, and its question is, what can I learn? Of course, this is one model, but I think when you start, sometimes those models are helpful if you can use several of them and find a consensus there. At least it helps you kind of envision what it looks like. Like JD said, the brain's hard to understand, and it's complicated. I'm glad we have them, but I hope they evolve to a state where they automatically fix themselves someday. But I don't think it's going to ever be that.
Would be too boring.
Yeah, I was going to say, what would be the fun of that?
It's not as fun. But it is, I think that kind of like interconnectedness in terms of like those brain states is important too, because if you get caught in any of those, including even like you have to very, very much develop your executive state, because sometimes we overanalyze things or we underanalyze things. But when you were talking about that, it made me think about in the limbic system, you're like playing the music at church or whatever. When I go to a music concert or something like that, it's very easy. You watch a YouTube video, they play the right music, and you start to feel a certain way. I think it's fine to be there in that moment, but you do have to at some point go and analyze that and look back at it. and kind of be able to critique little things about that and not be too much of a a cynic or what I do sometimes, which is just kind of be an asshole about things and be like, well, I was just feeling that because my brain was that way. It's like, it's okay. It's okay to enjoy those things, but you can't only exist in that state.
One of the most asinine things that the church teaches is that emotions don't matter.
Mm-hmm.
You look at a model of the brain, you see that emotions are like the central hub of your well-being. There's a lot there, and there's a lot to unpack. And like Stuart said, we're not experts, but we're talking about our experiences and what we've learned so far. And hopefully we'll learn more, get better, and be better.
Mm-hmm.
And as you understand these things and kind of get more in touch with these things, there is like more that you can, more kind of force that you can exert over them. Because emotions, again, like you said, are important, but it's not, you're not resigned to this thing has triggered me, and so I'm going to always feel this emotion. Or I've dealt with people who have unipolar or bipolar depression. They're like, I feel like this is going to last forever. It's like, no, you can do things that will, whether it's medicine or with a combination of therapy or whatever, you can get past that. Again, I'm not an expert, but I can show the data that shows that you can get through those things. But it's also valuable to experience, not obviously severe depression or a manic episode or something, but it is important to have those emotions and kind of gain some control over them.
One more plug. A book you got to read. And I know people like me would say, don't tell me I got to read it, but is The Body Keeps the Score by, for some reason, I don't remember names when I'm
but
talking.
Body Keeps the Score. It's a very good one.
Yeah. It's Bessel van der Kolk or something like that. I can't remember his exact name, but also
sounds like an alpha man.
Watch your language.
That is key. Yeah.
It's Bessel van der Kolk, I think.
Kolk.
Kolk.
Thank you.
You vulgar devil.
Had a Beavis and Butthead flashback there. It's a joke. Also, Peter Levine, which you mentioned briefly, Walking the Tiger, Waking the Tiger. Very good. And he's got a new one that's more simplified called something like that. But you can find it. Dr. Peter Levine, just some real, uses animals to explain regulation and things like that. It's really helpful. And he also promotes somatic therapy. So those two books I think would be great.
It's Walking the Tiger, by the way.
Walking the Tiger.
Yeah. I would also, speaking of animals, Enter the Dragon, great movie, and Chase the Magic Dragon, also a great song.
Nice.
Sorry, had to be.
All right.